I do want to bring in criminal defense attorney Eric Schwartzreich to discuss this a little bit more. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. Let's just start with this, Eric. What can we expect? We are awaiting this. We're waiting to get a look inside the courtroom as well. We do know Kohberger expected to plead guilty here in just a short amount of time. What is this process going to look like? How quickly are we going to see all of this unfold? Eric, I don't think we have your sound. Are you able to check if you're muted?
So I apologize for that. I'm talking to myself like I talk to myself at home with my wife, so I apologize.
It's okay, live television, but we'd love to hear what your thoughts are on how this is all going to unfold here within the hour.
So Kohberger is going to walk into that courtroom, and he's attempting to save himself from the death penalty. He's going to go into courtroom, and he's probably going to come out of that prison eventually in a pine box. The victim's family members are going to be in there. It's a mixed bag. I know a lot of the victims, they want closure. They're seeking closure. There's multiple victims here. Some of the family members are opposed to this, and some, are okay with this to save an appeal going forward and to have to keep coming to court. It is some closure, but what a prosecutor is supposed to do is to notify the victims and the victim's family and attempt to get their input. They don't necessarily need their approval because they can go forward. They're not the attorneys of the victim. They represent the state. So the defense is going to go in there and try and get this plea deal accepted. You're going to see a plea form that's been signed, and the court is going to turn to Mr. Kohberger, ask if he understands that he has a right to go to trial, that he has a right to make the state prove the charges, that he's presumed innocent until proven guilty, and that he doesn't have to do this. Now, it's up to the court whether or not to accept this plea, because even though this is a plea, the court has the final say. Even though death penalty is on the table, the court could reject this plea, and that could happen, but who is going to be made happy here? This is an awful, tragic thing. No one wants to bury a son or a daughter before themselves and have someone killed in such a cruel way. And some of the victims want this, some don't. So the judge is also in a rock and a hard place as to whether or not he's going to accept this plea.
That was my question for you. Can a judge reject this? You just answered that question for us, but how frequently have we seen that happen in the past? Is this something that does happen?
It happens. It's not frequent. There's not a one-size-fits-all with judges. Judges are all different. Judges in Idaho, I believe, are also elected officials. They also have to face an electorate sometimes, and the court of public opinion and pressure really shouldn't apply. Some judges will not take pleas. In cases that I do all criminal defense, maybe 5%, perhaps less. I've seen a judge not happy with a plea or think perhaps a plea is too lenient, and maybe thinks that the defendant doesn't understand the plea. So while it's rare and it's not typical, typically a judge will accept a plea, but not always. And this might be one of those situations where the judge does not accept the plea, but I would expect that he would in this case.
Now, we know the plea deal would allow Kohberger to avoid the death penalty, instead spend his life in prison. But are there any possible reasons why at this stage in the game he wanted to plead guilty, as we do know this trial was set to happen next month?
Well, there was also pressure. They wanted a continuance. They didn't get it. They were gearing up for trial. But I think the most important factor is death. While certainly life in prison, that's not an easy thing. And he's going to be spending his time. Life is life. He's going to do day for day. He will, if he takes his plea and it goes forward, the only way he's coming out of that prison still is in a pine box, but he will live. He will breathe. It's not ideal conditions. Otherwise the state was going to take his life away, the death penalty. So when someone's facing death and when life gets put on the table, you can see why an accused or a defendant would accept such a plea.
I think one of the biggest questions that I've had, I think a lot of our viewers have, is why, right? We don't have a motive here. And given the fact that he is pleading guilty, this trial set to not happen at this point, do you think we're ever going to get those answers?
Those answers are always going to be difficult, even if they get the answers. An accused has a Fifth Amendment right not to speak, not to talk to the police. During the arraignment, the first appearance, you saw that the lawyers stood mute. That was because they were probably maybe going to raise a sanity defense and force the court to enter a plea. the defendant can allocute today. What that means, simple term for saying he can speak in court if he chooses. The court could perhaps try and fashion some type of condition that he's only going to accept this plea if he hears from the defendant and he hears, an admission of guilt and something that is, satisfies the court. Whether or not Kohberger will speak in court, I don't know, but it's certainly possible. I know everyone wants that. I know the victim's family want to know why. Like, why did this happen? But will that really bring closure? It'll never bring their children back, but perhaps it'll give them some understanding. But there's really never a good understanding as to why someone, it was a self-defense situation, would murder young lives and take their lives away.
I did want to share a statement here posted by Kaylee Gonzalez's family. This was on their Facebook page, and it says, it's true, we are beyond furious at the state of Idaho. They have failed us. Please give us some time. This was very unexpected. We appreciate all your love and support. Now, for some context, that was posted a few days ago when they did learn that Brian Kohberger had accepted this plea deal. And a bit earlier today, I know that the Gonzalez family was posting on Facebook that they would like people to write into the Department of Justice about all of this, as they feel they have been failed. Moving forward, though, once Brian Kohberger does officially plead guilty, is there anything the families can really do from that point out?
Not from the perspective if he takes a plea. I mean, it's going to be final. And, I can understand why they want that. And that is perhaps a reason why the court is in a rock and a hard place and perhaps accepts the plea, because you have one family that's not happy and then another family wants this. They don't want to go to court. They don't want to have to deal with perhaps appeals and keep coming in there and having to give these impact statements. So not everyone is going to be happy in this situation. And that is the difficulty here that this judge is going to face, whether or not this judge accepts this. But what the prosecution did wrong here in Florida, where I practice, we have something called Marcy's Law. And the prosecution has to include the victims. They have to get their input. The victims can hire attorneys to go into court and advocate for them. And why the state decided not to include the victims, if that's what happened, I mean, that's really questionable to me, and it doesn't really seem to make any sense. And I think the state should have gotten the victims' input, listened to them, and see if they were on board before an offer to a defendant is made like this.
Now, Eric, going back, I do have another question for you in terms of Brian Kohberger's attorneys and their strategy. I mean, they did what they could to spare his life. They tried to bar prosecutors from seeking the death penalty. They said it would violate standards of decency. They said that his autism diagnosis reduced any possible culpability there. But none of this worked. And here we are at this plea deal. Why were all of these attempts unsuccessful?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. While they were unsuccessful at the end, we know that he is taking a plea and that the death penalty is off the table. And all of those arguments, whether, we don't execute the mentally ill, and I'm not saying that someone with autism is mentally ill, please don't think I'm saying that, but someone that didn't have the mens rea or someone that had mitigators in their life, certainly autism could be a mitigator. And putting forward, mitigators like that or lack of prior criminal history, whatever they did, in the end game, because as defense attorneys, we're always about the result. We're always about the end game. The end game is that they saved their client's life. And in a situation like this, that's a win. And that's what they wanted, to save his life. And the death penalty, if this plea is accepted, is now off the table.
One of my last questions for you here, the evidence that we had seen, the cell phone records, also his Amazon history purchases of that similar knife that was recovered at the scene. The trial not happening because he is accepting this plea deal. But if this were to gone to trial, do you think this would have been an open shut case in the sense that there was some surmountable evidence against Kohberger there?
I think it would have been a very difficult case for the defense. There was a lot of evidence. There was a lot of circumstantial evidence. And I think that the defense probably would have ended up with a guilty verdict, which would have moved on to the next stage, which would have been this death penalty stage, which is what's been avoided. So I do think, as far as criminal culpability or liability, that Kohberger's defense would have had a very difficult time with an acquittal with all of the evidence in this case.
All right, Eric Schwartzreich, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. as we do continue to watch all of this unfold. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.